Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We have Barry Lee O'Connor, with the law firm of Barry Lee O'Connor and Associates with us here, joining our forecast for the very first time. I don't think I was expecting to have Barry, who, by the way, is a specialist in eviction law. I'll let him do his own introduction here in a minute because it's too long for me to recite here. But I don't think I ever would have anticipated having an eviction attorney specialist speak at our market forecast. However, in the era of COVID and all of the moratoriums and the eviction rules and all the rest of that we're currently dealing with, it certainly seems appropriate. And I think there'll be a lot of us, whether you're landlord-tenant or a real estate professional who's currently wondering what's going on in the rental market with the moratoriums. I think we're going to find this extremely valuable. So, welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Lance.
Thank you for joining us. We've been doing business now on and off, going back to, I think, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac days.
Probably 30 years.
It's been a while. Yeah, I was thinking about that this morning as I was driving in, and I can just remember bouncing into you. I don't even think I really knew who you were at the time. You might have been doing evictions for my mom back in the Pioneer Property Management days. And then we just seemed to run into each other far too often during the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac days back in the 90s and then through the last cycle, and et cetera, et cetera. So let's just jump into it. So here we are, 2021. Been quite an interesting year with COVID, starting with the eviction moratoriums. When did they actually kick in last year? Was it March or April?
I think it started in March.
March. Okay.
Mid-March.
Okay, so that
started with them shutting down the courts too. They basically shut down the courts. It's about exactly a year ago.
Right, and that included the eviction, UD courts, and small claims,
and criminal courts.
And criminal.
Correct.
Okay.
Everything was locked down.
Okay. So today's March of 2021. So are we open technically?
Yes and no, and that's kind of been part of the problem with evictions. Riverside County is still locked down a lot more than what San Bernardino County is. We can't do a trial in person in the courtroom in Riverside County.
Okay.
But 15 miles away in Fontana, we can do a trial in the courtroom.
San Bernardino County.
Correct. So I can't figure out what the difference is between Riverside and San Bernardino County,
right,
other than the presiding judge, and I think it's a decision the presiding judge did.
So in theory, the rules are not county by county. These are statewide rules that are being followed, but they're being implemented differently?
There's local rules, and the local rules, the counties have jurisdiction over their own courts and operation of the courts, and they've made the decision that the court in Riverside County is not going to be open pretty much to the public.
Okay.
Everything's either going to do by Zoom or telephonic phone calls. And it's very difficult to do a trial over the telephone. And in my opinion, it's a denial of access to the courts, to the public, and it shouldn't be done at this point in time.
Interesting. Okay, so without getting too, and I told you before the interview, we were going to probably get a little bit more detailed than I otherwise would have expected. But this is important stuff, and I think I don't think we do anybody a service to just kind of gloss over it, and everyone's like, well, what does that exactly mean? So let's back up a little bit and let's kind of get where we are today. Okay, so the first eviction moratorium came in very early on in COVID last year. That ran through whatever the date was, but let's not go back in time. So the current federal eviction moratorium runs through March 31st, correct?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And I think that's for rents. It's not for cause or just cause. I think that if you have a reason to evict somebody, you can still evict them out of a property. It doesn't relate to rent.
Got it.
And that's one thing we should bifurcate when we're talking about evictions.
Okay.
And there's basically two theories that you're going to go on. The first theory is tenants that owe rent, and the second theory is for either cause or just cause.
Got it.
And the theory on evicting somebody for rent is practically impossible at this point in time, or not a good way to go.
Okay, let me clarify something just for our audience, because we have people from all over the country that are watching this. So we're specifically talking California, even though I just mentioned a federal eviction moratorium. So probably just ignore the federal eviction moratorium, because it really is not going to have any impact on us, correct?
Correctly, probably not at this point in time, since this is mid-March,
right,
and it ends at the end of March. And we're talking about eviction, and people need to know this. It's my belief that eviction is the lockout. It's not the process of somebody being evicted.
Okay, so understand. We'll get into the process of the eviction, and then ultimately at the end of the day, if I'm a landlord and I have a non-performing tenant, or if I just want to do something differently with my property,
Right.
the end result is I just need the lockout, assuming I don't have a tenant that's cooperating.
Correct.
Okay, so just to kind of set a baseline here. So for those of you that are watching that are not in California, we're not talking outside California, and quite honestly, some of them we might have county to county variances as well. It sounds like,
And city to city.
and city to city. Okay,
Correct.
all right,
And then we also have residential versus commercial,
got it. The commercial is a little
more flexible.
more flexible, a little looser,
Right.
more similar to what
Right.
what we're accustomed to.
An example of this, like for rent on a commercial, you can still do a 3-day notice,
Got it.
whereas opposed, or whatever the contract states in the commercial.
Got it.
But one of the things that was changed in California is we now would do a 15-day notice to pay rent, and actually, they, and certain forms, COVID forms have to be served with it. And at this point in time in California, you have until June 30th to actually pay the rent.
Okay. Okay, so let's, again, just to kind of reset the stage here just a little bit. And this is the part that concerns me, because I have landlords that live all over the country, and we're going to get back to that conversation you and I had before we started here this morning in a minute, but they live all over the country. They own property in Southern California, in our market, in our property management department, but they also may own property in Texas or Florida. So, but the thing that concerns me more so than anything else is I'll have a landlord who owns one property, it's in the city of Riverside. They're watching national news, okay, and they're talking about the federal eviction moratorium. And they'll call me and they'll start quoting what's happening on the federal level. And I immediately reel them back in and says, okay, let's ignore that and let's come to see what's happening in California, Riverside County, city of Riverside. So we just need to be really careful as you're watching this. So if you're in the situation where you think you want to pursue an eviction, one size does not fit all.
Correct.
So what's the current status of the moratorium, the timelines and the deadlines, and what can and cannot be done?
Well, that's a complicated, wide question, broad question. At this point in time, I'm going to bifurcate this like we talked earlier. We're going to talk about rents first. There's somebody that owes rents.
Okay.
It's very difficult to get somebody out that owes rents at this point in time. You have to give them a 15-day notice, and you have to give them a COVID notice.
Right.
They can submit back to you the COVID notice. If they submit back to you the COVID notice, then they only have to pay 25% of the rent that's due. And they have to June 30th to pay that at this point. If they don't submit back the COVID notice, allegedly you could file an unlawful detainer action on them.
Right.
But you could get all the way to court 2 or 3 months down the road, and the judge could say, well, I'm going to let them submit the COVID notice
Right
now.
now, in court. Right.
Court, and then that defeats your purpose.
Right.
That's why we're always looking for at-fault or no-fault causes in order to evict a tenant.
So basically, if we have a tenant who's not performing in the area, they're not paying their rent, it's pretty much off the table.
Right, and then another issue you have with this that just came up, and that was on the 15th of March, is there's a funds available through the federal to the state and administered by the state and administered by cities over 200,000 people, that a landlord must apply to for money if the tenant owes you money.
And that's the 80% relief?
Correct, for
Okay.
80%.
Right.
If they do not want to apply for that, they're bound to the 25%. That means that all they can do is ask the tenants for the 25%, and the 80% is gone. The bad thing about all this is that if you decide to apply for something, you have to cooperate with the tenant, you have to fill out the paperwork and stuff, and then you're bound by whatever that decision is. And that's from the rent back from April of 2020
Right.
until the rent of basically June 1st of 2021. So whatever lump sum that is, you cannot ask for more rent, and you cannot do an eviction if you accept rent, and you're required to apply for those funds.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying the money aspect of getting a tenant is very difficult, and it's complex, and it's heavily strewn in favor of the tenant.
Right. So let's kind of put that in a little box here and then maybe move on. But before we do that, so if I have a tenant who is not paying their rent and they filled out the form, which basically says it's COVID related, I have a hardship which is
Correct.
related to COVID. There is an 80, first of all, you have to apply for the 80% relief, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, which is a government, is that state or federal? Or both?
It's both, kind of, because the money comes from the Fed to the state, and then you have to apply through the state program.
Okay, so let's just suppose I'm $20,000 in the arrears on the rent, and I go to this I go through the process as a landlord. I can get 80% of that 20 grand at some point. Is that actually happening, by the way? Do you have any experience with people receiving
It just
the funds?
started 2 days ago.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we've been talking about it for a month or a few
Correct,
weeks, and now it
correct.
just kicked in. Okay, so I guess we'll have to revisit this,
It-
which, by the way, just to time and date stamp this, we're broadcasting this on the 24th of March. Barry and I are doing the interview on the 17th, so
St. Patrick's
so
Day.
it kicked in on the 15th of March,
Correct.
2021.
And I
Okay.
think the law was passed on January 31st.
So let's assume it's efficient and it's working, and I apply and I get my 80% relief. It's my understanding that once I accept that 80% relief, the 20% that is uncollected is uncollectible.
Correct.
Okay, so it's just, I'm
Whatever
foregoing
figure
that.
the program comes up with, you're bound to that figure.
Got it.
And it may be less than 80%.
Okay.
And you're stuck with that figure. But you can opt out, not take the 20 or 80%, and then you're stuck with the 25%.
Got it. Ugh, boy.
And then if the other thing is you can't bring a suit against the tenants for the rent in small claims court or anything at this point in time, and everything is frozen. There's no credit reporting on money owed by the tenants. You can't report to tenants if they're late. You can't have late charges if they're late. You can't use their security deposit for rent unless you have an agreement in writing between the tenant and the landlord.
Okay, so if we have a tenant who's not paying their rent, we have a problem. Let's just summarize it in, we've got a problem.
You got a big
We've
problem.
got a big problem, so we're going to kind of set that aside for a minute. Now, you mentioned a just cause. Is that what the legal reference
Well,
is
there's a
for-
couple. There's at-fault just cause.
Okay,
An at-fault just cause would be a material breach of the term of a lease. And then your issue is going to be there is proving it, such as you rented the house to a husband and wife, and all of a sudden there's a whole other family in the house.
okay,
And it lists who the tenants are supposed to be in the house. So that's a breach of the lease. So what you have to do in that case, you give a three-day notice to perform covenant or quit for illegal subletting of the property.
Right. We've got the wrong tenants in there. They're not on the original lease.
Correct. And then you got to go back, and after that notice expires, you got to be able to prove that they're still there.
Right.
And then you do a second three-day notice, and that's just a three-day notice to quit at that point in time. So that's one of the at-fault just cause.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with any specific example, but I just can't help myself. So what about the new tenant who's not on the lease? Can they assert some sort of tenant's rights? And it seems like anybody can assert a tenant rights. I've got a
Correct.
claim to be here. Or what if they
Correct.
pull up an addendum?
They're going to do what you're going to do is a 415.46 as to all unknown occupants living in the property.
Right.
And then the court's going to make that determination. If they assert those rights, they're kind of a fool because they don't have a defense to that.
Right.
Just by them asserting the rights proves the case, because they're not supposed to be there. And so what's going to happen is they're going to end up being evicted. If they kept themselves out of the lawsuit by not asserting any rights, and that's what we try to talk people into a lot of times, and pre-COVID we do it all the time because, hey, look, you're going to have a money judgment against you. But during the COVID situation, which is worse for the landlords, you can't get a money judgment against a tenant.
Got it.
And that's why we don't do the 15-day notice to pay rent or quit, because it's useless as far as the money judgment goes.
Okay, let's do this. Let's because I think we could go very deep into that. So let's set, unless you want to come back to something you think is important. So let's set aside we have a tenant who's in breach of contract, non-monetary, the example you just gave, or they're not cutting the grass or they're not maintaining the property. Let's just leave that aside for a
It's
minute.
got to be a material breach, though.
Okay, something material, and we'll come up with whatever those examples are. Let's go to where I think a lot of our audience may be today, and what we talked about earlier. Let's just suppose, for absolute hardship reasons on the landlord's part, the landlord, or maybe not hardship reasons, I just want to get out of the rental business. I want to sell this property. 100% legitimate. I want to sell it. So what's the rules with that, and how do we move forward?
What that is, again, that's under 1946.2 of the Civil Code, and what that is, no fault, just cause.
Okay.
And if the landlord has the intent to occupy the property, and either their spouse, domestic partner, children, grandchildren, parents, or grandparents, that's one way. If they want to move
They
back,
want to move back in.
they want to move back in. The other way is if they want to withdraw it from the rental market, which means they want to sell it. Or they just want to, maybe if they rented a room or something in their house, and they don't want to rent that room anymore, they just want to withdraw it from
What a horrible idea that would have been.
Well, it happens all the time.
I know.
And I see it all the time. And I see people, investors, buy houses that aren't zoned R2, and it's an R1 house, and they turn around and rent out the mother-in-law house in the back, and that
Right.
just creates all sorts of problems.
Right.
And the easiest way is to convince the landlord, hey, quit renting it. You shouldn't be renting that property.
Got it. Okay, but let's not overcomplicate it. I've got a house. I want to move back into it, or I want to sell it. So what are the rules?
Well, the rules are you have to give a 60-day notice.
Okay.
There is no such thing anymore as a 30-day notice, what used to be if somebody lived there less than a year. And a 60-day notice is for over a year. So now it's generally a 60-day notice, but you got to give the 60-day notice, and you got to have your no fault, just cause stated in the 60-day notice. And basically, it used to be that you could give a 30-day notice or a 60-day notice for any reason at all. Now is you got to have the cause stated in the notice.
Got it. Okay, so I give notice. So I've given them a 60-day notice, and should I or can't? Well, I guess they're two different questions. Can I market the property for sale immediately?
I would advise against it.
I could, but there's a million reasons why that's a bad idea.
Correct.
Right.
And that's what I argue with clients every day about. You don't want to, a tenant is entitled to quiet enjoyment of the property. By
Right.
you marketing the property,
Right.
you're interfering with that quiet enjoyment. Plus, you have the aspect of the tenant torpedoing your deal.
Right. I have several landlords and agents that need to listen to this right now, because we've done this in real practice.
It's a nightmare.
And it's a nightmare. And frankly, it really has not worked. Let me put it this way. We certainly haven't got through the legal process. We've gone through pain and agony and heartburn. And I think in maybe one case, the tenant left, but they didn't leave because they were locked out. They left because it was easier for them to move out. But yeah, it's a nightmare. Okay,
Correct.
so let's just suppose we give them the notice. We choose at this point we're not going to market the property because we don't want that extra tension involved with trying to schedule a showing, which is hard enough anyway.
Correct.
And now you try to schedule a showing in the COVID era, and hey, I don't want you in my house because I don't want you to make me sick or whatever it happens to be. So 60-day notice, they don't move. Then we
go to a summons and complaint, and
Okay.
it changes the rules on the summons and complaint now too. And whereby the summons and complaint is no longer 5 days to answer, they have 15 days to answer.
Okay.
And also they've changed the rules where weekends don't count anymore as time, so they get additional time because of the weekends.
Okay.
So they've strung that out further. By they, I mean the courts and legislature and the governor. And they've made it more difficult time-wise for the landlord. And what will happen is that you need to get the summons and complaint served, and if you can't get the summons and complaint served on the individual tenants or occupants of the property, then you have to do a posting order. And this brings in the whole court process, and even on the summons and complaint. The courts, because of the budget restraints in California and cutbacks in California, are operating on a skeleton crew. We can't get a summons and complaint issued at the courts, at the clerk's office anymore at the counter. We have to mail it in, fax it in, or do it electronically. Then we have to wait for them, by them I mean the clerks, send the summons and complaint back to us.
Right.
Then it's got to be served. And if we can't serve it, then we have to do a posting order. Then we have to go through the whole process again by mailing it back into the clerk or getting it to the clerk, waiting for the clerk.
So it's an easy process, very efficient, works very smoothly.
Right. And paperwork gets lost and it
Right.
gets in stacks. And it's just ridiculous the time frame it's taking to do an eviction now because of the whole process, the way it's been held up.
Okay,
And
so-
one other thing, if anything can be done in the tenant's favor, it's being done in the tenant's favor. There's
Right.
nothing that's being done pro-landlord.
Right, understood. Okay, so at some point, okay, so we're going through this process, we're going through a posting, we're going through a survey, and it sounds like the clerk's window at the courthouse is basically
Shut down.
Shut down. And that's pretty much
Over everywhere.
Okay, got it. So that adds time. Now we're doing things in mail that we used to do in person, maybe. Okay, so at what point do I get in front of a judge?
Well, you get in front of a judge at the point that after the tenants have answered the summons and complaint, you file what's called a request for setting. Again, that's got to go through the clerk's office, and then they have to, under the law, they have to set it within 21 days for a trial.
Got it.
And it gets set 21 days out approximately. That's when you get your court date. But the problem is now is that there's it seems like 10, 15, 20 years ago, 1 in 3 cases was represented by attorney or legal aid society. Now it's almost an attorney on every case on the other side.
They're basically standing in court saying, hey, I'm here
You're
to
correct.
I'm here to help.
And the internet. And
I remember the first time that happened, just a quick sidebar, I remember the first time that happened with me, because I used to actually go to court and do all the evictions.
Right.
It's been a while since I've
I
done
remember
that.
going to court with you.
Of course. Well, and I think, I'm sure you were probably in the same room, and we were showing up, and prior to some of that legal aid type stuff, it was pretty much standard stuff. You go up, you would present the case, and we'd do our thing, and pretty much you're out of there fairly quickly. And then I remember the very first time an attorney standing up, or somewhere in the hallway, kind of saying, hey, I'm here to help.
Right.
Like, well, you're here to help who? Well, they weren't there to help the landlord.
Right.
And so that's standard fare now. That's just...
Well, and you're talking about Moreno Valley. And Moreno Valley, we worked out a deal with legal aid, and we felt there was solicitation, but, the compromise sort of was they couldn't do that in courtroom. They could only come so many minutes before the court, and then they could only help the tenants on certain types of cases.
Got it.
And it's still done that way. But I'm talking about now there's attorneys out there that they claim they're nonprofit, but what happens is if you get rents, you have, sometimes you have to pay the tenant to move out.
Right.
And if you have to pay the tenant to move out, that money's really not going to the tenant, it's going to the attorney that's representing them.
Right.
To their corporation, their quote, nonprofit.
Well, I think a lot of landlords right now would be happy to pay the tenant to move out.
Yeah, and we end up doing that, especially sometimes what the tenants can do is they can request a jury trial. And Riverside County just started doing jury trials. And I don't know how they're going to do jury trials over the phone.
Right.
But San Bernardino has been doing them. And a jury trial is much, much more expensive than doing a court trial. You're
course.
talking $5,000, $6,000 to do a jury trial.
Right.
And so if you pay the tenant a couple $1,000s to move out of the property, you're ahead of the game.
Okay, so let's back up. So it's March, middle of March. We file a 60-day notice, just cause eviction. We want to, sell the property.
You don't really file it, you serve it.
You serve it. Okay, so again, let's back up. So at what point am I going to get a judgment for possession?
You either get a judgment for possession if the tenants don't file an answer and you take a default.
Okay.
Or you go to trial and after the trial and you get a judgment. You have to have a judgment before you can get a writ issued. Our ultimate goal is to get a writ issued.
To get the writ.
And then the problem with the writ now, again, it's got to go back to the clerk's office, and it's taken them, because of their limited staff, 30 days to issue the writ.
Oh, so they're not doing that, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that used to be kind of simultaneous.
Yeah, well,
right?
30 years ago when we did this, Lance, we get the writ issued in the courtroom. The clerk would do it sitting beside
at the same time.
At the same time
Right.
the judge. Then it went to doing the window, then it went to being dropped off, and now it's 30 days to get it. And then after that 30 days, you get your writ back, then you just got to go to the sheriff, and then you're looking at about 3 weeks for the actual lockout.
Okay, so again, I'm looking for a date. I'm looking for a timeline. So we have the 60-day window for the service.
5 months.
No one's going to hold you to it. Approximately, best case scenario, when let's suppose the tenant doesn't file an answer, so we save a little bit of time.
Are you talking after the 60-day notice
Yes,
expires?
after the 60-day notice.
3 months
3 months.
is the best case scenario. 5 months is probably more reasonable.
3 months, and is that including getting the writ and then
Yeah.
another 3 weeks? Okay, so 3 months, but 5 months.
Yeah. And
Wow.
then there's other things that tenants do, and especially when there's a paralegal involved, someone that's not licensed to practice law, they'll file federal removals, they'll file bankruptcies, they'll file demurs. There's a lot of things in between that they can do to delay it further.
Okay, so and again, I'm gonna make sure I'm understanding. I think I have a good understanding of this, but I always learn something, and I probably learned 15 things already this morning. Okay, so right now, and I think we mentioned this earlier, the current California eviction moratorium runs through June 30th, correct? Is that where we are?
Well, the moratorium relates to the rent.
I understand, but I'm just talking about that. So
Yes.
there's no lockout. Again, our audience, they're not distinguishing
No,
this.
we're not
Most-
talking about no lockout. I'm just talking about if the tenant owns rent.
Understand.
If we did a cause or just cause,
But follow me on this.
Okay.
So that really has no bearing on where we are right now, because right now it's the middle of March.
Right.
The best case scenario where we get to lockout is going to be 5 months from now anyway.
Correct.
So we're going to be well past that
correct,
date. Okay?
unless they extend it out further like they've done 3 times before.
Which is where I'm going. So they're probably going to extend that June 30th out to September something, or maybe even December 31st.
Correct.
So if that happens, and we're betting that that's going to happen, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, but let's just suppose using our 5-month window, we're April, May, June, July. So now we're in August, and potentially on our just cause, we follow the rules. We're not evicting for rent. We're now in the middle of August. Could we proceed to a lockout, regardless of that extension, maybe to September or December? We could do a lockout.
Yeah, I did a lockout yesterday in not Hidden Springs, but in Moreno Valley on Sunny Mead Ranch. I went there personally because somebody wasn't showing up like
How
they
many
should.
times have you personally showed up at a lockout that wasn't your own property?
That's twice, maybe.
Twice, and they both been in the last 12 months or in the last few months.
No, I don't remember the other time, but yesterday was the first time.
Well, that says a lot. I mean,
Because I was afraid they'd cancel the lockout.
Of course.
I knew I could stall the sheriff, get them to stay a little bit longer till the locksmith got there. And I was in Riverside, and I knew it'd take me 15, 20 minutes to get there.
Right.
The sheriff was going to be there in a half hour, but the property management company couldn't be there before then.
well, that's all I need to know. We can just stop the interview right now. The fact that you actually personally showed up on a lockout for a client, basically, correct, is
And I had no tools.
absolutely. And you had the tools.
No, I had no tools.
Oh, you
with
had
me.
no tools. Ugh. Wow, that's just amazing to me. Okay, so we're going, I don't even know where we are right now. I think we're 20, 30 minutes in here, so we're going to keep going. I want to go back to what you had mentioned before the interview. You had a few clients contact you yesterday, I think you said.
Yeah.
And the gist of that was, I own some rental property. I think it might be time for me to sell it and get out of the rental business.
Let me tell you how I got into doing this. We talked about this a little bit. I never did this prior to a year ago.
Okay.
I always gave away free legal advice. But we get 30 phone calls a day. We get 20 emails a day. I've gone where I had to do half-hour consultations. And these are 3 people that, they're legitimate clients because they paid for a half-hour consultation. One of them was in Utah, one of them was in Arizona, and one of them was in Texas.
Right.
Basically, it was the same story. They all own property in Riverside area and Riverside County. And all of them had been residents at one point in time of Riverside County and moved out of state.
Right.
And what they were doing was selling either properties that they held as rental properties or property that had been former residents, that they were rental properties now. And they wanted to sell their property, and because that was the only way they could get out from under having a tenant.
Right.
And because we can't go the money. Some of them, they were owed money, some of them, they weren't owed money. But these are 3 properties, and I get 5 people I talk to a day almost, the same story, that they want to take it off the rental market.
Basically, they want to sell.
They want to sell. It's a single-family resident. So this is 5 less properties I see a day, or 3 less properties I see a day that are going to be on the rental market, or going to be off the rental market. So these are single-family houses, not apartments we're talking about. So that's less single-family houses that are going to be on the rental market. That's it's going to raise prices on
Rents.
rents, but there is a cap on the rents of 10%, 5% plus cost of living, up to or less than 10%. And it's just going to be more and more difficult for the tenants because of the legislature, what they've done in regards to the eviction process in the state of California. It's make it untenable for a landlord because they have no control over their property and they can't get their rent from the property.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of landlords that are nervous. And again, we could go on a sidebar. We manage hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of properties in the Inland Empire. I am pleasantly surprised. I'm shocked, quite honestly, that our delinquency rate, frankly, is really no different than it was pre-COVID.
I'm the same on my own personal properties
yeah,
too.
And we were really nervous. As a matter of fact, we probably got some of our landlords watching this right now, and you'll know that we did an emergency webinar in April of 2020. We did another one in May of 2020. We did 5 or 6 of them. But early on, I was like, oh my God, these tenants are not going to be paying their rent. And I needed to prepare our landlords for that. And I was shocked that really has not been the case. Our delinquency rate is I think actually less than it was pre-COVID. But let's put that aside for a minute. So you've got people calling you saying, I want to sell. A lot of people, and by the way, we do have some landlords that are in that boat where their tenants have not paid 10 months, 11 months. And every time I kind of have a little bit of joy in my voice when I say that our overall portfolio is performing nicely, I always catch myself and say, well, wait a minute, what if I'm one of these landlords that's watching me right now and they're not happy people for a lot of obvious reasons. So, but the larger point, because again, a large portion of our audience are realtors, and we're doing it just an economic forecast. We're going to have the econ guys come in and say, we have a housing shortage and we need more units and we need more of everything. And it seems like the only thing that people are building these days are rental housing in the form of multifamily.
I think it's going to continue that way too.
Of course. But I get excited, maybe not so much you, but I actually get a little excited when I hear some rental stock may come off the market and turn into resale single-family homes owner-occupants again. Not to go back and talk about all the hedge funds coming in and purchasing tons and tons of stuff and taking what otherwise would have been single-family home owner-occupied stock and turning that into rental stock. So I'm just curious if what you're experiencing will translate into what we actually need on the resale side. We need more houses to sell. So
I don't think there's that great of a percentage of that will transfer into sales. I mean, these houses were spread all over. In fact, I got thinking one of them actually was in Corona Del Mar. I don't know if you're familiar with Corona Del Mar, and the Flower Streets, and somebody took a duplex, and they've split the duplexes into 2 separate units in Corona Del Mar. And this guy had a back unit, and somebody had a front unit, and he was having difficulty with this back unit. And that's going to go off the rental market. I'm sure that particular one will, and he just wants his cash out of California and take it to Arizona. And it's so that's one less, but that's a different market completely altogether.
Of course, but if you're getting calls regularly from nervous landlords that are thinking about selling, whether that actually comes to market now or whether that is in the third or fourth quarter or maybe 2022.
One thing that's bad that they've stepped on the landlord's foot, so to speak, too, is you cannot charge a late charge during this COVID. You can't charge a late charge on any late rent. And myself as a landlord, I work with my tenants. I'm happy just to get the rent, even if it's toward the end of the month and they're not getting a month behind. And like you said, it's been my experience, and I've had a little bit more difficulty in the commercial properties I have, but the people are trying, and you understand what's going on. And I think toward the end of August, September, I think the rent situation will be changed around, but I don't think the laws will be changed around. And I don't think the laws are going to go back to help the landlord at any point in time in California.
So we're probably looking at a new normal moving forward that is probably similar to what we've maybe been experiencing now, longer time frames, more...
Well, I'm hoping that they're claiming budgetary problems is what's the problem with the court system. So hopefully something's done with the budget within the court system, or somebody needs to bring a suit against them because it's a denial of access to the courts at this point, I feel. And you know, we it's just like you can't walk into a court and have your case heard. You know, you have to do it over the telephone. And it shouldn't be that way. Not at this point. Not the way we are with the COVID is. With everybody getting their vaccine at this point in time, and the numbers way, way, way down. And we need access to the court, and the landlords need access to the court.
Yeah. Wow. Barry, I think we could go on for another hour. But I'll tell you what, with respect to your time, this is, I knew you would deliver. This is exactly what my clients are looking for. I think you're certainly going to deliver some value to our audience here for our 2021 real estate market forecast. So thank you very much. Is there anything else that maybe you want? Okay, jump in.
One other thing I want to think of, it's going to affect the market, I think, in 2022, 2023 possibly, and that's unrealized capital gains.
Okay, so Barry's got a forecast here for us. Okay, I like it. I like it. I've been asking our prior speakers who aren't maybe the economists what they actually think the market's going to do. So tell us what you think about the capital gains projections.
Well, this is unrealized capital gain.
Okay.
And what an unrealized capital gain is, just in case you don't know, and it's, you know, hopefully I'm correct, is that say if you bought a stock at $100, it's now worth $1,000.
Okay.
You have a $900 unrealized capital gain.
Correct.
Well, the current Treasury Secretary and some members of Congress want to impose a tax where they're going to tax you on that unrealized gain of $900. And the same goes through with real estate then. If you paid $200,000 for a house, it's now worth $500,000. It's a rental house. You have $300,000 worth of unrealized capital.
Haven't sold it.
Haven't sold it. You still have
the money.
Where are you supposed to come up with the money?
Right.
So what's going to happen is, I think that people are going to think about this. Hey, it's not worth it to have a rental property anymore. I'm going to sell my rental property.
Right.
So there goes more rental, individual single-family residents off the market, and possibly duplexes or fourplexes.
Right. So that's being discussed right now.
Correct.
Is that part of a legislative package right now?
I don't think it's been put. It's just been heavily discussed.
Right. Right.
And,
but that makes people nervous.
And it makes me nervous.
Politicians start talking about that, and people react.
Yeah, it makes me nervous. And you know, there's enough going on in California, but to see this federal government trying to tax you further, and the state has various things that they're trying to do that are anti-landlord, and they want to put a tax on landlords in the state of California for just being a landlord. Right. So it's becoming more and more an unfavorable situation, and a good investment for a landlord.
So based upon that possible outcome legislatively, your prediction, I think I know what it is, but so what are you suggesting is going to happen in 2021, 2022?
There's going to be less single-family residents on the market. They're going to be sold off as owner-occupied.
There's going to be less single families for rent. These
rent.
landlords are going to say, forget it, get me out of here.
Get me out of here. Get me out of the state, or, you know, I don't want to be a landlord, period, anywhere anymore.
Right.
And they're going to take their tax. And, you know, I think forgot the figure I got. It was going to go from 28% to, or 20% capital gain to 38% they're talking about on the federal level. And so some people, to avoid, you know, this increase may you know, think about getting rid of their assets.
Just exit the market.
Exit the market.
Yeah. Interesting times.
Yeah, different.
Interesting times. Yeah. All right, Barry. I tell you, thank you. You've been I don't know whether I'm the client or you're the client. I guess I'm the client. But as far as I'm concerned, hands down, the #1 eviction attorney in the Inland Empire. I refer everybody to you.
Thank you.
So those people that are calling you, that you're like, why are you calling me? It's myself and a whole bunch of other people in the real estate industry that you've just earned our respect and trust, and you're always my go-to guy.
Thank you.
So anyway, thank you for participating in our 2021 real estate market forecast. And Barry's video will also be available offline on our social media, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All righty.